Welcome to the Birchal podcast. It's great to have you with us. This is the podcast from the platform connecting the community with founders, industry experts, and startup greats. With over $190 million raised across 240 successful campaigns, we certainly know a thing or two about capital raising. But remember, the information and discussion in this podcast is for informational purposes and should not be considered as advice or a recommendation to invest. So please do your own research and always consider to the general CSF risk warning and offer document before investing. Now, imagine you're a serial entrepreneur. You've had multiple exits, you've built big businesses from your tiny startups, and you're now stuck with the other conundrum that you've got more money than you could possibly spend in your lifetime. So what could you do, and what would you and how would you spend your time? Well, this was the conundrum facing Don Pym, an investor in Birchal and a major contributor these days to helping build the next level of infrastructure for future entrepreneurs and the ecosystem more broadly. Thanks for joining us. This is a great insight to what you could do and what successful entrepreneurs could do for the next generation. Dom, welcome to the podcast. Good to have you here. Pleasure, absolute pleasure. Now, for those who don't know, you're a big fan and investor in Birchal and very much put your money where your mouth is when it comes to this platform. First of all, I'd love to start, what is it about Birchal that kind of resonates so strongly with you? What is it that you like about Birchal?
What are you saying? I'm a groupie.
I think you could say that. Yeah, I think probably worse than a groupie.
Yeah, look, I used to live in the UK and I got involved in the crowdfunding industry over there very early days. So I was an early participant in Seeders, which is now part of the Republic Group, and also Crowdcube. So I sort of had experience in crowdfunding and as an investor and a participant in those companies before the regulations changed in Australia. So when I heard about what Birchal and Equities and others were doing, I thought, no, this is going to be awesome. And it's something that we need. Look, we need liquidity in the market. We need easy access for founders to raise capital. We need easy access for regular folk to be able to invest in these startups and take an interest in them. So for me, I sort of experienced it firsthand while I was in the UK, continued doing that from Australia remotely. And then the guys from Birchal came and said, hey, would you like to get involved? So, I feel like I've been involved now in Birchal for quite a few years. I would have been one of the first or very early investors in Birchal, the company. Yep. But also on the platform. I was quite active on the platform. And when Matt and Alan actually approached me and said, you're, if not our most active, one of our most active participants. And it was interesting for me because I felt like I could sort of find companies that I wouldn't otherwise have found on the Birchal platform. And so then when the Birchal founders came and approached me and said, would you be interested in investing in Birchal? I thought, this is great because it's sort of creating an ecosystem. So I'd say that was the spark, is that Birchal can be more than just a platform or a marketplace or an equity crowdfunding site. Birchal can actually be part of the ecosystem and part of the fabric, the foundations that make the Australian startup ecosystem. So that's why it's interesting. That's why I'm a groupie.
And for you, was it when you were first starting to do that, that was just kind of just a bit of a hobby piece, or was it something you've always been thinking about in terms of that investing?
I feel like it was a hobby in the sense that I've been doing it for more than a decade. So it was something that was just tinkering in the background. I've always been, interested. So my very first job, early days, like I was still maybe 15 or 16, was writing software. Like first proper job. I did paper round and all that other stuff that you do, but I worked in factories and stuff, and Macca's. I worked at Macca's. No, but my first sort of real job in the city, get on a train, go to the city, dress up in a suit, carry a briefcase, all that sort of stuff, was when I was a teenager. My best mate's dad had a software company. And his son wasn't interested in software. He played tennis. So, that's all he wanted to do. He was in Wimbledon juniors and he became a tennis coach and all that stuff. Okay. So I took an interest in software and ended up in a role building software for the financial services market, a stock exchange. And then we built financial services software. So I sort of just had an interest in investing from the very, very early days. And now for, I guess, 30 years, I've been, investing, whether it be through crowdfunding, public markets, direct investments, funds, ETFs, whatever, all sorts of different ways to consider, financial literacy, wealth, investment vehicles. And so in a way, it was mostly tinkering, mostly hobby.
And I was thinking SAP, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, well, I was at SAP after that. So I started this little company in which my best mate's dad, which was a little company called Saratoga.
Right.
And I did that for a few years, and then we spun off another company from that called Rincon. And then after that, I applied. I was actually living in South Korea, and I'm doing an exchange program. Which is the first time I was 19, and the first time I went overseas, I had to get a passport, all that sort of stuff, and I had to learn to speak Korean because no one spoke English.
Wow.
So that was awesome. And even at university, all of the curriculum, all of the exams, all the textbooks, it was all in Korean. So I've never learned another language other than English before.
Korean's a tough one to start with.
We had to do like a 10-day, induction program or whatever, and we learned to count to 10 and say hello.
Right.
So yeah, that was a cultural immersion. And I could, I say, Dominic, give me that. Hold you, so I see you. So like, that was 25 years ago. So it's like, I can sort of write Korean. I can still understand it and say a little bit, but yeah, you got fully immersed in it. And so I was over there in Korea, the reason for the background, and I contacted the university and said, hey, we've got to do this, sort of have an undergraduate program that industry-based learning, or we used to call it cooperative education. And I said, I want to work at, the best software company in the world. Who are the top employers in Melbourne? So they gave me the top employers, and they were Microsoft, Oracle, SAP, Digital, I can't think, Compaq, like these big IBM, these big technology companies in the early 90s. And so I just went and interviewed with all of them, and then I just played one off each other until eventually. But when I went to the SAP interview, they didn't have a graduate program,
right?
And they had a requirement to only hire graduates, and they had never hired an undergraduate. So I became the youngest employee ever at SAP, and also the first undergraduate they'd ever employed. And the reason I wanted to work there was that they were the enterprise software provider for all the brands that I knew and all the companies that I thought I might want to work at one.
Okay.
So it was actually not so much that I knew anything about SAP, other than they were a German software company. I really knew nothing else about them. But everyone else, like, I don't know, BHP or Woolies or NAB or Combank or any of these companies you can imagine, they all ran SAP.
Right.
And so I thought, well, that's a great place to be, because I'll get introduced and get to meet all these other companies where I might want to work one day. Like 7 years later, I was still working at SAP. I didn't realize how awesome they were. And at the time, they were the second largest software company in the world.
Wow.
And they're still the third largest software company in the world. But most people don't even know they exist.
Second to Microsoft and
back then it was second to Microsoft. Now it's Microsoft and Apple, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. So you were starting to learn about financial services industry, and that's kind of where, I guess, because I look at your career now and it's really become about ecosystem broadly, right? So when did you start to go, right, this entrepreneurial thing is for me? And how did that kind of early exposure to kind of broad and large scale business, how did that start to kind of change the way you thought about the world and your impact and your legacy?
Actually, when I left SAP, I came back to Australia. I was working with SAP all around the world, in Silicon Valley and in Asia and Europe and so on. And I came back to Australia to set up the software development team here. So that was awesome. But I didn't do that for very long, because I sort of got itchy feet. And I thought one of my colleagues, who I met on the first day that I started at SAP, we'd sort of kept in touch all those years. And he wanted to start a record label. So we actually quit the software industry to start a music business.
Cool.
Which was completely crazy. And I was a software guy, so I wrote all the software for the company and all that sort of stuff. And it was a real journey, and it was amazing. We became like the largest independent software company in Australia, independent record label in Australia.
Very Richard Branson of you.
He was my hero.
Okay.
Yeah, I met him in a pub once in England, and he was my hero. I read his biography and everything. I thought, I'd love to be like Richard Branson one day. And so, we started this record label, and it was crazy times, but it was really our first startup of meaningful size or nature. And it was reasonably successful. Well, we had a number 1 song, number 2 song, number 3 song. We sold, I don't know, tens of thousands of albums, and we ended up with a digital platform for artists. We became a content aggregator for iTunes, all sorts of amazing stuff. Because we were doing that, late 90s, early 2000s, like when we were the first iTunes content aggregator in Australia.
Wow.
And there's only 2 in the world, one in New York and us. Right. So we were right there at the precipice, the beginning of the journey. Like when I lived in Silicon Valley, there was no Google. Now you can't imagine a world without Google now, right?
Yep.
Well, Facebook or Instagram, anyway.
Yep.
But so it was actually a long time ago, and that startup was sort of like, I guess I called the startup bug, and it was hard yards, very difficult. We exited the music industry after a few years. I can't remember how long now, but it might have been 5 or 6 years, or maybe longer, 8 years. we entered the music industry and we started another startup. And then I had a sequence of startups, like a serial entrepreneur. I had a sequence of startups from there, just going at it again, going hard, failing, going again, failing, going again, failing, going again, succeeding. So I think that record label is meaningful and important. In fact, I'll just tell you the story. I got invited between Christmas and New Year in the break to go down and meet with my original business partners and the first band that we had at the record label. Cool. We had a barbecue and we've got kids now and all this stuff. But it was amazing looking back. It's literally 25 years ago, right? So looking back and saying, well, what have we achieved in the last couple of decades? Yeah. And most of us, getting married, having kids, running businesses, whatever. But a lot of the conversations went back to, well, what were the foundations of that? Because some of the people that worked at the record label still work with me today at Up. And so followed me for 20 years. And in that time, we've had many, many different startups, a dozen or more, maybe more, maybe 2 dozen. But certainly for 5 or 6 of them, the same people, I talk about Tommy all the time and Ruckmail and others, but they've followed us through those different startups. And we have one company working in technology and agriculture, and we weren't there for very long, 16 months we were doing that company before we sold it. Probably a dozen or more of the people that work there, maybe 20 people, now work with us at Up. So I think that along the way, I realized that these startups can have a bigger impact than me, or a bigger impact than the founders, the employees. You start thinking about the customers, and then you start thinking about the environmental impact or the industry impact or the impact on people's education or financial position, financial well-being, financial literacy. And so these things, I think, happen over decades. They don't just happen overnight. But as each subsequent startup, whether it was successful or whether it failed, sort of made us more self-aware of the industry as a whole, rather than just our company and the problem that we were trying to solve.
With that development in your thinking there, and that kind of broader and broader perspective, at what point did you really start to guide your thinking, your investing? Obviously, you've developed Up, which is, Australia's, I think it's most loved. Is that the way you describe it?
It's the highest rated bank in Australia.
That's right. Yeah. Extraordinary. And I was on it last night, and the user interface is like, wow, this is so different. And it's something it's amazing to see that. So where is this kind of purpose piece? How have you been able to weave these two things, which most people really struggle with, right? If you work in financial services, often you work in payments aggregator or something like that, and it's dry and you want to poke your eyes out, or you're futures traders of oil and something. It's all usually really dry, but you've been able to actually link the two between purpose and your technical understanding or technical capabilities. When did that actually, how do you do that?
I think it's culture.
Right.
So for me, I was working for 15 years with Tomo, who was an AFL footy coach. And I always say it's his job to tell his own story, right? So I'll just tell it from my perspective.
Right.
He was a personality. He's on TV and the radio and the newspapers and all that, coaching an AFL team, blah, blah, blah. So he had a very different perspective on what it meant to build a team and build a culture than what my experience was. He's 20 years older than me. So many things I could learn from him over time. And what I learned, in a nutshell in that 15 years is that if you can do what you love, and that's your job, and you can find other people that love that too, then you build this amazing culture within the business, and that you can do anything, and we can literally change the world. And then we realized that our impact was beyond what we were doing in the office. So at some point when we had, say, our agricultural software company, we built a grain exchange. It was the world's first grain exchange. So it was innovative, and we got patents and all that sort of stuff. But while we were there, we didn't have any money. We didn't have any customers yet. We were just a team of people who were trying to change the world in some small way. Now, when I look back on it, 75% of farmers on the east coast of Australia use our technology to sell their grain.
Wow.
We did a partnership with the biggest bulk handling company in Australia, all this sort of stuff. But when we didn't have money and we were struggling, we just got some side projects to make money. Well, one of those side projects was WordPress. We built we built the mobile app for WordPress. It was the first open source Ruby on Rails mobile app ever.
Wow.
And then we did the Lonely Planet app, where we actually Steve Jobs announced on stage when Apple launched in-app purchases. And now you think about it now, like people who weren't there in 2007, 2008, 2009, you think back to what was happening then. There was no in-app purchases. It was like you buy an app and it might have cost $80 or $100 or whatever. Eventually the price of apps got down to $1 or less, and they became free. And then they monetized through making money in the app. Well, we worked with Lonely Planet to build one of the world's first I think there were 12 of them that were built and then announced at WWDC. And Lonely Planet was one of them. And we wanted to get our logo up on the thing with Steve Jobs and all. And never happened. They put the Lonely Planet logo up. But we did those projects and we started realizing that our team was actually the power that we had. Culture within the business and the team that we had could literally do anything. So whether you're building a platform that powers 25% of the internet, or you're building the world's biggest travel app, or you're building a grain exchange to help Aussie farmers sell their grain, or nowadays we're building a bank for the next generation of Australians. We're the second fastest growing bank in Australia. So how do you sort of think beyond your own team and the benefit that you guys are getting, and then the benefit that your customers are getting, and you start thinking, well, how does that actually impact the industry? It's just a change in mindset that took a couple of decades to mature. Good wine. It just took a while to mature. And then we realized, well, actually, maybe successful founders could give something back and maybe even think back to who helped them get started. Yeah. So Tomo was a massive influence, like, in a colloquial sense or a friendly way, call him my work wife. Like him and I spent more time together than we did with our actual wives. So, we built a family, and the family was a team of software developers and engineers and product people and designers. And to this day, the people from the footy club that he coached years before would come to the office. When they had a kid, they'd bring their kid to the office.
Wow.
And so there was this sort of connection. And you're saying, well, Tomo's Wikipedia page says how he changed football. And he changed football through bringing sort of corporate ideas and corporate methodologies into the sporting world. And then we kind of did the opposite with Up, where we brought those sporting ideas and cultural ideas and team and elite performance and everything into the banking world, just financial services. So for us, we started thinking about, well, if Tomo as an individual can have that impact, well, what impact do we have? What's the legacy that we leave? So I think Tomo was a big influence, but there were lots of other people. I mentioned, my first job in IT, my best mate's dad, like huge impact on me, because I knew him while I was young and formative, from the age of maybe 7 to the age of, 27. And so he was very successful, and he made a lot of money out of the financial markets, and was trying to help other people, to do that sort of stuff and to educate and to train people and build software and all this sort of stuff, build tools. And I thought, that one person is not worried about their own circumstance, their own situation. They're worried about other people. They're selfless. And so if you look at people like this guy, Phil, or you look at Tomo, or there's another guy I met at Toyota Motor Corporation, and he introduced the idea of financial services for cars, like to borrow money to buy cars and everything, in the 1980s in Australia. And so John was amazing. And one day he turned up at our record company, and he was my mentor when I worked out at Toyota with SAP. And he turned up at the record company, and his resume, and he goes, Dom, I've just come to see if you've got any jobs for me. I'm like, what's going on? Like role reversal, like he was my hero, And he goes, no, I just heard about this amazing stuff that you guys are doing, disrupting the industry, and wondering whether I can help. And so those people had just a massive impact on my life. And the commonality between all of them is they were trying to do something that was selfless, something beyond them, something that would impact the country or impact the industry or impact a particular startup or a particular public company. And I thought, well, I could do that. And I think anyone can.
And for founders who have been through this business cycle, a lot of them, it can be an exhausting process, actually end up selling up and exiting a business, right? You can often get stuck in there in terms of the earn-out period. So for those people, though, they find themselves in a position where they potentially have like a great responsibility, right? They've now got usually a sum of capital which they haven't had access to previously. So what would you say? How should a founder approach that period? What would be your kind of advice around that piece?
I reckon it's different strokes for different folks. Like a lot of the time you'll say, well, what can you do when you get money? I was very fortunate in that the companies that I got involved in, either through the crowdfunding that we talked about earlier, or founding, like as in being a co-founder or participant in the company, or even public company equity. Like some stories, like when I got early involved in Tesla, I heard about Tesla and I heard they were releasing the Model S. This in 2012. And so I put an order in, took 2 years before it was released in Australia. And then I went and picked up the first Tesla Model S in Australia. There's like 4 of them were shipped over here, and I just happened to be the guy that turned up first. But that's 2014, so it's like 10 years ago. And I've had a couple of different Teslas since then. But I actually bought the Tesla with profit that I made from trading Tesla stock. So Elon Musk bought me the Tesla. I didn't actually buy it. I was literally using the profits from that trading. So you start thinking about how can the money from selling a business actually impact you either starting your next business or investing in a fund or launching your own family office or helping people in need or being philanthropic or being charitable. Like, it's going to be different strokes for different folks. And so there's not one size fits all. You can't expect everyone to sort of give 10 years of their life or more to building a startup and then not have some selfishness, not wanting to look after their kids or their family or their husband or wife or whatever. So for us, it was like, could you think about maybe this problem or this mindset as an onion? You start in the middle of the onion and it's got lots of layers. It could be anything else. Don't have to be an onion. Just like lots of layers that you can peel away, right? But if you start at the core, maybe the core is you, right? So you need to help yourself. Look in the mirror each day and think, how can I be positive? How can I be confident? How can I be curious? How can I be innovative? How can I be creative? How can I be a good person? How can I give back? So look in the mirror and help yourself. And money can help you do that, but there's a lot of positive mindset that can help you do that too. And then start thinking maybe the next layer is your immediate family. And then the next layer is your extended family. And the next layer is your friends. And then the next layer is your college, people that you went to school with, or employees that you work with, the same company, colleagues. And then maybe the next layer is your customers or, customers from your previous startups or the next layer could be the industry. And the next layer as you go eventually becomes the country or the world, right? Depending on how big and how successful you are. So for me, it was sort of starting with that thought and then thinking, right, well, who can I help? So we launched a little foundation. And the idea of the foundation is that we help people in need. Who are we going to help first? Well, the first people we helped were some friends and family and employees that we knew were having difficulties. They had a stroke or they had a sort of debilitating disease, or they needed to get back on their feet and earn an income, or, whatever it might be, right? Or needed to pay for the hospital bills or blah, blah, blah. So we thought there's some people in need. We have some money. We could do something there. So we started a foundation. And then we thought, there's a lot of founders in Australia that don't have access to capital. And I've been there as a founder a dozen times or more. So, can I help? Can I actually go and be the person, the mentor, the guide, the advisor, the sort of, the person that can make a difference? And there's two ways we can do that. One is that we can help with money, help literally start a fund or start a family office and provide money to founders. And the other is to share our experiences and to see whether we can mentor or provide advice or guidance. And a lot of the time I have a philosophy that, you learn from the school of hard knocks, or, you need to, you only learn from practical experience. And so those failures are very important. We don't want to isolate our children or isolate our founders or isolate people in the industry, sort of entrepreneurs, by not letting them experience those failures for themselves, because they're much more meaningful when you experience them.
Certainly.
But we can make the journey easier or better or more robust. And certainly the Australian market lacked capital. So it makes sense for us to think, okay, well, one of the ways we can have an impact is to share our experience and stories and those sort of things. But another is that we can provide capital to the market. So for me, it was like, what are the things, we call it now our thesis at the family office, right? Family office is called Euphemia. Euphemia is the Greek origin of the name Pym. So there's a meaning for it, right? So my wife came up with it, but it's also Harry Potter's grandmother, so it has many meanings. But so Euphemia sort of very quickly became, what can we do commercially? So launch a fund, help entrepreneurs, raise capital for startups and so on. Make a return, so invest in funds, get behind venture capital, equity crowdfunding, angel investing, all sorts of different private equity, all sorts of different investment vehicles, that we could use to make a return. And then the other is sort of on the foundation side is being able to help people in need. So we thought, well, what are the things that Dom has done? Because I'm the founder of the family office, my family office, so I can be selfish for a moment. What are the things that I've done, or what are the things that I care about? What is it that how do I want to change the world? And we thought there was three good things that we wanted to change the world. Well, obviously, make awesome is could mean anything and might mean different things to different people. But to me, it basically meant build the tools, provide the capital, incubate the culture, find the people that can accelerate the industry. And it's inspired by Elon Musk and Tesla and SpaceX and all these things they're doing. And you can like the guy, you can hate the guy, whatever, it doesn't matter, it's irrelevant. Number 1 and 2 best-selling cars in the world were Teslas, right? It's only been around for less than 15 years. So what is the impact? Is it accelerating the advent of the adoption of electric vehicles? Is it changing the environment? Is it, like making us a multi-planetary species? So I realized that whether it's Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos or Bill Gates or whatever, they have really big, hairy, audacious goals, things that you and I would say that's crazy. That's shit crazy. It's like impossible. And we don't get a lot of that in Australia, like the tall poppy syndrome. We don't get people like come out with these really change the world sort of things. So I thought, well, my little version of change the world is provide capital, provide guidance, provide advice, whatever. Make awesome that can help make more awesome. And the awesome that we can help make is in the areas that are interesting for me. So the areas that are interesting for Dom, I was FinTech Leader of the Year twice in 2022. So like peak Dom, 2022 peak Dom. And I won the C-suite at Pause as well. So
are you calling in already, are you, in terms of peaking?
Oh yeah. So basically won 3 awards as the best leader in FinTech.
Right.
So I'm like, well, FinTech, and I'm on the board of FinTech Australia. So and many of my startups have been FinTechs. So I would be one of the most experienced FinTech people in Australia. So how can I use that for good? Well, I can help mentor other people in doing FinTech. I can help invest in FinTechs. I can sit on the board and help influence government policy for FinTechs. I can do all these different things that can help elevate the entire ecosystem of FinTech in Australia. Turns out FinTech is one of the number one, if not the number one industry in Australia now. So forget about mining or education or public service or financial service and all other things. FinTech is dominating. And so what is it that Dom can do to help FinTech? So that's an obvious one, right? That's one part of our thesis. The second part is female founders. What can we do for female and underrepresented founders who don't have the same opportunities? So represent 53% of the population, or 52, or more than 50% of the population, represent a massive portion of founders, but only get 3% of the capital. So there's a job to be done there. And the job that we can do, which is slightly different than what others are doing, is make sure more underrepresented founders, including women, get access to capital. And I can rock up 40-year-old dude with a beard and white dude with a beard and get access to capital. Well, why can't it be the same for my daughter? Why can't it be the same for Judy? Why can't it be for the same for anyone in our sphere, anyone in the Australian ecosystem who needs to raise capital, regardless of their background, experience, race, gender, all that sort of stuff? Forget all that shit. How can they have the same opportunities that Dom had? So that's why we focus on female founders and underrepresented founders. And then my mum quit school when she was 14, had to go out, earn income, lived in a poor family, blah, 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 and never finished school. And so I can't even imagine, I've got a 14-year-old son, I can't even imagine him leaving school. He knows nothing. He's naive, he's not worldly, he literally knows nothing. So I can't imagine him leaving. I love him, and he's like super smart in his peer group. But like, I think about my mum leaving school at 14 to go and work and earn money for the family and all this stuff. It's wild, right? So in her 40s, when we were little kids, she went back to TAFE and learnt about this thing, the hole in the ozone layer, global warming, climate change, and blah, blah, blah. And she came to our grade 6 class at primary school, might have been grade 5 or 6. And she came and told all the kids and did a little presentation about the environment and the hole in the ozone layer and how, what it is we can do and solar power and all of this stuff. I've never forgotten that. Well, that's my mum. You can't be more proud of anyone than your mum. And so my mum went back to school to learn that stuff and then teach a generation of kids about it before it was cool. This is the 1980s. It wasn't cool yet. Well, everyone was talking about it. It wasn't public policy yet. So for me, climate is the third one. Like all my life, for all my investing career, for 25 years, I've been investing in climate tech. So women founded and underrepresented founders, fintech and climate tech, it's just what Dom's interested in. It makes sense. So that's why the family office focuses on those things. And it's our little way of giving something back. It's also our little way of trying to elevate the entire ecosystem and making Australia a better place for the founders.
Extraordinary. And why have you taken a position largely that you'd expect a government to take, or someone with much kind of broader, lofty, which may even stand to gain more than perhaps you would commercially yourself?
It's an interesting question. Like, as a family office, we have more money than we could ever spend. So we don't have any need to make any money. We don't need to make any return. So we have a different driver. We're not a venture capital firm or a private equity firm. Their job is to make a return. They're dominated by the power law, where they invest in 100 companies. One of them becomes a decacorn. One of them becomes a unicorn, and the rest of them don't work out, for argument's sake.
Yep.
For us, that's not relevant. We don't think like that. We think, how can we change the ecosystem? How can we help the next generation of young Aussie founders? How can we help the fintech industry in Australia to change public policy? How can we help Australians to be competitive on a global basis? How can we help Australia to innovate and build our place in the global economy? So in some ways, we have more influence than government, or more influence than a venture capital firm. And by the way, we advise government. We sit in roundtables. We meet with the Prime Minister's office or Treasury or whatever, and we represent on industry bodies. So like I said, I'm a director on the board of FinTech Australia. So we try to influence government where we can make positive impact. We try to provide direct capital where we can. But we also invest in a lot of venture capital and private equity and other types of funds across the entire spectrum. So from angel investing with Aussie Angels, where we led the round, for example, to Birchal, where we're first or early, one of the first few investors and been in every single round that Birchal ever had, including the crowdfunding rounds, all the way to venture capital and private equity, like even Tractor Ventures doing, non-equity, like debt financing. Yeah. So across the entire funding ecosystem in Australia, we have 20 or 30 investments in all the brands, Airtree, Square Peg, Blackbird, all of them. And part of that reason why I say that out loud is that Dom Pim, one person, and Judy, right, the two of us, it's just the two of us in the family office. We can't have this outsized impact that we want to have. So we leverage capital, put money into, say, Airtree go and make 100 investments, which they announced recently. They've hit their 100th investment. And so therefore we get to share in making those 100 investments through them. And if we do that, you imagine across 30 different funds, 30 times 100, we start investing in thousands of Australian companies. So now when we look at what are we directly invested in, there's probably 100 different, investments we made in the last couple of years. What are we indirectly invested in? Probably thousands. Yeah, so when we walk in a room now at a conference or an event or whatever, nearly every single person in the room is somehow funded by Dom.
Yeah, interesting.
So that's an impact. I hope it's an impact. I hope it can help make Australians and entrepreneurs more competitive and somehow innovate on a global scale.
It's very cool. I love the. It's also you're thinking about leverage. You're thinking about legacy, and what is that for your son, and what is that for your family in terms of what does legacy mean to you?
I mean, it's emotional when you think about it about your kids, right? Like you start thinking, well, I want them to fail. I don't want them to just succeed. I want them to have the same lessons or better lessons or different lessons than whatever I had. I also don't want to encourage them or force them to do things that I like. Like if they did something in fintech or climate tech or helping underrepresented founders, that's great. But I'm not encouraging them to do that. They're sort of finding their own path in the world. My son built a computer over the Christmas break, and it's his first computer. He's 14. He built his first computer, and I went and got him, we went down to the shop together and bought all the parts. He saved up his money for 2 years.
Wow.
And my wife and I said we'd be happy to put dollar for dollar match, to help him because he can't afford 14. He can't afford to buy all the parts and stuff. So we said we'd be happy to match dollar for dollar, but we're not buying for him. Like we're making him go through, we could buy him 10 supercomputers.
Of course, yeah.
We're making him go through the same journey that every other kid goes through. Like, he has to learn, he has to build it himself. And the action of building it himself, he's so proud now whenever he's playing games on his computer or doing some software programming or whatever. I've never really encouraged him to do that. I guess I'm just saying that because that is stuff I loved doing and I'm proud that he loves it, but I've never forced him into doing that. I don't make him do that. If he wants to do that and he's passionate about that, good luck to him. But I'd like the kids to actually sort of create their own legacy and have their own lives and think about the things that make them exciting. My daughter's 7. She came into the office and we have a CEO, Zave, at who has been CEO longer than Tom or I ran Up. Like we sold the company when Up was 2 or 3. He was CEO before we sold the company and he's still CEO now. So he's been the CEO for a long time. My little daughter walks into the office and he says, "Oh, hi, how you going? Blah, blah, blah." And all this stuff. "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And she goes, "I'm going to be the big boss." And she goes, "Well, where are you going to be the big boss?" She goes, "Here, I'm going to work it up. I'm going to be the big boss." And he goes, "You're going to take my job." So I think that kids can dream and kids can have that big, hairy, audacious goal. Like I was saying before, changing the ecosystem in Australia or elevating it or helping it to be more globally competitive or whatever is a huge, hairy, audacious goal that we may never be able to achieve. We can try and encourage others to help us. And the power of the movement is that if people see what we're doing and get inspired, and then we have a few different, like people call me now, founders who've just exited their $1 billion unicorns or whatever, and say, "Hey, I'm thinking about setting a family office. Really love what you guys have done with your Femia. Can we have a catch up? And we can just talk about what you've done and how you've done it." So our influence then becomes more than just what Judy and I can do. We went out so we have worked with private wealth managers and investment banks and all this sort of stuff. And one of the private wealth managers, Cresto, this company we work with in Australia, they're awesome. They used to be UBS, and then I think the partners bought them out, and so it became Cresto, and then they sold it to the Liechtenstein royal family, so they're now LGT Cresto. So it's this huge private wealth manager, the largest in Australia, I believe. And they asked us if Judy and I could come in and talk about setting up a family office to their clients. And so we did that, and we thought it was great, and we got up and we did the thing of it. But then walking around the room afterwards, I won't name drop, but it was every single name you can think of that's a famous high net worth Australian was in that room. Wow. And they're asking us. Wow. Why? Because we're young and crazy with big, hairy, audacious goals, and we're innovative and we're doing things with technology. And we're sort of in that next wave. Like I grew up with the internet and with software and computers and all that sort of stuff sort of happening. Most of the family offices in Australia are, 2, 3, 4 generations. They've come from property, mining, retail, the normal sort of industries that have been successful, you can imagine. And so those kids or those grandkids are now saying, well, what do we do and how do we do it differently? So typically, to put it into perspective, they would invest in startups maybe 1 to 3% of their portfolio. Whereas 90%, 80%, whatever it is of our portfolio is invested in what they call inverted commas alternatives. So they look to us and say, well, wow, we love what you're doing. We love how it's so different and so innovative. How can we do that too? So we're very proud that, you mentioned leverage, like our ability to inspire a generation of founders who say, shit, look what Dom did. Like he exited these 3 companies and then he started a family office and did all these things. I want to do that too. Well, how awesome would that be?
It's certainly a more creative. It's more imaginative. It's more, like I love the passion or like I love thinking beyond commercial returns because I think you speak to a lot of family offices and it just becomes very sanguine or very kind of, okay, well, welcome. Yeah, here's my analyst, here's my so-and-so, and we invest in this. We're looking for a blah, blah, blah return.
Well, it's always capital retention then, isn't it? It's like maintaining the family wealth and the legacy for them is having an income. The legacy for us is not an income. We have that. The legacy for us is growing that pool and influencing the Australian startup ecosystem. That's it. It's just a different reason for being. Preservation of capital is obviously important, but it's not our goal.
I love that. Very cool. It's very cool, Tom. And from your perspective, what is success? Well, actually, will you achieve your goal? And is there ever a point where that job's done?
I mean, we've had failures in the past, but I would say we've never not achieved our goal. We're very tenacious. Everything we've ever done, whether it's in sport, whether it's in software, whether it's in business, I think everything we've ever done in our lives, we've smashed it out of the park. So I think we'll achieve our goal. Whether or not our goal is impactful enough to be noticed, I don't know.
But isn't it kind of, it's difficult to define what we're talking about here in terms of expansion or growing the Australian ecosystem more broadly? Like taking Birchal as an example, when does that become quote unquote success?
Well, for me, Birchal is on this amazing journey. I don't see Birchal as a crowdfunding platform. That's how people might see it, right? Equity crowdfunding people. That's bullshit. Like Birchal is an on-ramp to the ASX. Birchal is an opportunity for founders who can't raise public funds. Birchal is an opportunity for founders that don't want to raise venture capital, or maybe do want to raise venture capital but are not ready yet. Birchal is an opportunity that is beyond just a simple equity crowdfunding. The secondary market. The opportunity to create new markets, the opportunity to create, like I said, this on-ramp of financial services, the opportunity to create a community. Imagine everyone that ever raised capital on Birchal. I've seen this in the UK, for example. Anyone that's ever raised money on Birchal becomes part of, they're the Birchal alumni, so they become part of a community. And then if you look at the aggregate impact of a couple of $100 million worth of raising capital, that in itself, a couple $100 million is bigger than many venture capital funds or family offices in Australia. So the impact that Birchal have is very significant. And therefore we want to think about it not as an equity crowdfunding platform. That's one thing that Birchal does. We want to think about it as a leverage. It's actually a lever that I'm using to change the ecosystem, to elevate the ecosystem, to accelerate the growth of the ecosystem, to make the ecosystem more competitive on a global scale. So Birchal then becomes one of those sort of tools in the kit bag that can actually help create that legacy.
And the secondary market piece in terms of liquidity in the alternative investment space, naturally that's going to work well in your favor, given your exposure to it. But it's also probably the biggest missing in the alternative space, right? And it sounds like, is it more well developed in the UK?
Yeah, the UK is like totally different. So for example, I'm one of the top 20 shareholders in the 2 biggest crowdfunding sites in the world. I became very small, insignificant investor through crowdfunding. And then on the secondary markets, I just spent 10 years buying stock from everyone else until I secured a position. And it shows me on the thing that I'm in the top 10 or top 20 shareholders, right? As a crowdfunder, right? I'm sure they have much bigger institutional investors. And so for me, that same opportunity exists in Australia, but it's completely untapped. We have one secondary fund in Australia that's dedicated to secondary. A lot of the venture capital firms will do secondary. But we have one dedicated fund, which is second quarter. We're also an investor, an LP in second quarter.
Right.
So, but there's only one, right? So we see a market where there should be many. we're launching a fintech fund at the moment, a dedicated fintech fund, and it'll be Australia's first dedicated fintech fund. And we probably will launch a fintech fund and then an underrepresented founders or women's fund, and then a climate fund, because again, that's aligned with the things that I care about. But going back to the fintech fund, we want it to be public market equity, startup like private capital equity, and secondary, all in the same fund. There's no other fund in Australia that does that we know of. So very commonplace in the UK or the US. So the secondary market is a massive untapped opportunity, and it's what the entire ASX is. Whenever you're buying shares on the ASX, unless you're doing an IPO, you're trading secondary stock.
Yeah.
But in the startup land, that doesn't really exist here. In other countries, not only are there platforms to do it, like Crowdcube and Seedrs in the UK or Republic in the US, but there's also marketplaces. So you can go to Setup, for example, and in the US, and you can trade secondary stock. But and the crowdfunders have been doing it over the last decade. But yeah, it's just a piece of the Australian ecosystem that needs to evolve.
Isn't one of the biggest challenges there in terms of evaluation or pricing of these entities when it comes to secondary market? Isn't that particularly hard to do?
Well, I mean, it's particularly hard to do in the equity crowdfunding market, and Birchal are dominating with 80% market share. So I think Birchal are in a good position to then extend that capability into the secondary market. I think that there's a sophistication of pricing. Like what's typical in the Australian market is that everyone waits for a lead. I mean, it's typical anywhere in the world, but in the venture capital market, people are looking for someone to take a lead, do the pricing, do the due diligence, and then bring the others in. So we often do that. Euphemia often ends up leading rounds because there's just nobody to set the price. So we just set the price. How do we set the price? We use all the methodologies and techniques and net present values and discounted cash flows and all the things that everyone else would do, but we're just prepared to take the risk. So especially during COVID, we only launched Euphemia a couple of years ago. We've done more than 100 investments in the last year. We are very comfortable with risk. And so when we look at pricing, we price risk into it, but we typically will lead around or we will help price around. So sometimes we don't have a big enough check to be able to lead it. And so someone else like an Airtree or a Squarepeg or a Blackbird or someone else will lead the round. But we can help with the due diligence and we can help with pricing and that sort of stuff. So I'm not suggesting that we're any better than anyone else at it. We're just prepared to take the risk. So I think that if you could monetize that, you could commercialize that through a platform, then that, whether it's Birchal or someone else. I know that, like I said, we led the round with Aussie Angels, and I know that Aussie Angels can do that too. So they're doing it for angels, Birchal are doing it, for sophisticated investors. So I think that all of those opportunities currently exist in the market. When you and I have this conversation again in 3 years, 5 years from now, it'll be a totally different topic because the secondary market will be nailed. Yeah. Someone will have nailed it. And hopefully it's Birchal. Or at least hopefully we're part of it.
Yeah, cool. Well, you're hedging your bets. Well, you're not even hedging your bets. You're like putting bets left, right, and center, which is awesome.
Well, because we want to elevate the entire ecosystem. Imagine if we said Tractor were going to solve that problem and we only invested in Tractor. Or Startup Galaxy are going to solve that problem. We only invest in that. Like we want to actually invest in everyone in the ecosystem or everyone that's solving that problem in the ecosystem. Birchal is another good example that we talk about because they're a tool that help you deliver software, right? But Birchal only exists because they spun out of one of my other companies, Pin. I started Pin with Grant Bissett back in the day. It took us 11 years or whatever to exit Pin. So similar with Ferocia and Up, like it took us 10 years to exit. But once we'd sort of got the ball rolling, one of the spin outs from Pin was Birchal. And the first paying customer of Birchal was Ferocia, who had built Up. And so that's called Dom Enterprise. No, we call it Euphemia now, right? But that was our little way of artificially trying to help the ecosystem to evolve. Now, companies, big brand name companies all over the world, that's all over the Birchal website, so I don't want to say the wrong company names, but huge companies that you can imagine like Shopify or SpaceX or whatever, I know, huge companies, are all using Birchal to deploy their software. And it's a little Aussie startup that was just incubated and innovated within one of our startups. So already there's leverage. So we're now influencing, I don't know what the number is, hundreds or thousands of software companies all over the world. Some of the biggest brand name companies in the world are now using a little Australian piece of software to deploy their software to their customers. So that is a tool. And so we talked about the secondary market of Birchal and that sort of thing. Now we're talking about a software tool, but it's exactly the same thing. If we can help Apple or Google or Tesla or any of these huge companies, Facebook, whatever, if we can help any of those companies to deploy software to their customers quicker or better or more securely using the tools that Birchal develop, not only are we an investor in Birchal, but we literally are part of the genesis of Birchal. It wouldn't exist PIN didn't exist. I started PIN, me and Grant. So I feel like that's another way that we create leverage, is that we create tools, and then those tools go on to help startups be more awesome.
I want to touch on the climate piece briefly, and that can kind of finish up our conversation here. That needs leverage like there's no tomorrow in terms of the scale that we're facing. What's your perspective on what's missing in that space, if that is your assessment?
I mean, it's accelerated very rapidly over the last 20 years. And we have nowhere near any amount of capital that could move the needle. So for me, the way I felt like Judy and I can use the Euphemia assets to help in climate is been through small investments in lots of bets, lots of small, really innovative entrepreneurs.
When you say small, what kind of ticket?
I mean, anywhere from 10,000 to $1 million.
Right.
So anywhere in the small end, early stage stuff, could be 200,000, 500,000, whatever, 100,000, whatever it is. But any of those really early, small scale ones, because we don't have 10 million, 50 million, 100 million, a billion that's needed to do some of those big projects. So if we can actually, in that example, we're using breadth. So we're saying, right, well, can we invest in 300? At the moment, we might have 30 climate businesses, for example. Can we invest in 300 or 500 or 1,000? So they would have to, but necessarily be smaller checks, but then hopefully we could have a bigger influence. Now that might mean that more of them fail because we're making more bets, but hopefully we can help some of them to succeed. And hopefully some of the ones that wouldn't otherwise have succeeded. If they didn't get, so we're nearly always the first check. If we're not the first check, we're in the first crowdfunding round.
You're on the bleeding edge.
Yeah, right at the beginning. So in that regard, a lot of those companies wouldn't exist if I didn't chuck in £50,000 or $100,000 or whatever. I've got great stories. There's a company at the moment that operates in 200 countries, a company called Spreedly. And they're multi-billion-dollar unicorn, blah, blah, blah. But at one point in 2012, maybe 2011, 2012, they're going to shut the company down. And I became their first investor. And we went on to raise some venture capital and all that sort of stuff. And I don't take any credit for the success of that business, but that business would not exist if I didn't buy the assets from them and move them into another company and then invest cash so they could keep paying to the seller. Right.
Right.
So, and they'd been at it since 2006. They'd already been going for 6 years.
Wow.
So it wasn't like they were really at the very early stages. They were really having a good crack at it. And the problem is that the problem area that they solved was then built by Stripe and Braintree and all these other companies. So they sort of put out of business, if you like.
Yep.
So they had to pivot the entire business. But that little investment, I think it was $125,000 US, if I remember. I'm trying to remember. I might have confidentiality and stuff. I'm not sure what I meant to say, but it was I would say a nominal investment at a very early stage and a 180-degree pivot of a business with the 4 original co-founders and no employees. So that was a hugely risky bet that no venture capitalist, no private equity firm, practically nobody, certainly not a bank, nobody, unless it was maybe your dad or your mum or your auntie, nobody would invest in that. I invested in that because I knew the founder and we used their product in one or more of my companies already. So if I didn't make that investment, that multi-billion-dollar company operating in 200 countries would not exist. So these small bets in climate will hopefully one day create some Spreedlers in the climate space.
Wow, that's quite an extraordinary return. 125 grand, so extraordinary. Dom, an amazing way to approach it. I'm humbled by your what's the words? Your non-selfish perspective, actually, and this kind of endless pursuit of more money, etc. You've clearly worked out that that's kind of pointless, and there's little fruit after a certain point. So, yeah, thank you for what you're doing in this space. Is there anything you wanted to say to round out this conversation, perhaps to other founders who may find themselves in a similar boat?
I think I appreciate you saying thank you. It's lovely to hear that. I think in relation to Birchal, I'm very proud to be a participant, and I'm a massive advocate. And I really would like to see more startups supporting Birchal, raising on Birchal. I'd like to see Birchal launching new products and having a really material impact on the ecosystem over the coming decade. That'd be a dream. And it's not because we're investors in Birchal. That's great, like I said, that you get a return or whatever. It's because I really see Birchal has an opportunity with an 80% dominant market share to literally change the industry. So I think that is very important. For founders themselves, I think that, if I can be any sort of inspiration or any sort of mentor or any sort of guidance or just sharing experiences or co-investing together. There are a lot of co-founders that exit, don't know how to invest or don't know where to invest. So we do a lot of co-investment. We run a syndicate, for example. We have over 100 people in our syndicate. And I think the last raise we did was for Future Super, which is a $15 million raise. We didn't have $15 million to chuck in. So we just got an allocation and then we syndicated that out to other people that we know. That's the sort of stuff we can do to help other founders. So maybe they don't know where to start. They could hopefully be inspired by some of the things we're doing at Euphemia, some of the things we're doing at Up. They could reach out to Judy or me anytime. I had my mobile phone number and email address on the homepage of our website for 10 years.
Wow.
So any customer can contact me, any founder can contact me, very easily accessible and hopefully can be some inspiration or a co-investor or an advisor for the next generation.
Tom, thank you so much for your time.
No worries. Thank you for having me.